So let's start with page 2. Now, just to let you know, I'm going to take page 2 and kind of split it up based on what is considered axial and what is considered appendicular in page 2. And so I don't want to really confuse anybody. So that's what I'm going to do with that one. So we are on the 8-2 section. And so let's start with the very first bone that's on the page. And this is on 8.12 figure. And that is this guy. And if you look, he has these like little fangs. And it always makes me think of, you know, as a kid that you put the things in your mouth to hold it. And then you have the like little vampire teeth or whatever. And that's what this little guy reminds me on. And this is what's known as a hyoid. And so let's come up to our little skeleton guy. Hello, baby. Anyway, so if you look, you'll notice on the side that there is this random bone hanging out here. And you can see that those little fangs go up. And so this is a really cool bone because this is the only bone that does not create an articulation with another bone, which means a joint. Because this is there essentially to help protect the larynx and the trachea and the airway. So this is the hyoid. Pretty cool bone, isn't it? So now let's go and talk about the vertebrae. And so if we're looking at this guy again, you'll notice that this is the vertebral column. And you can see this, pull this out, on 8-2, and that's what we're in right now, right? The remainder of the axial skeleton known as the vertebrae. And so the vertebral column is as such. The first 7 is the cervical vertebrae. And then the next 1 through 12 is the thoracic vertebrae. And then you have 5 lumbar vertebrae. The sacral, which looks like a little heart there, right, is 5 vertebrae, but they're fused together. And then the coccyx is 4 vertebrae fused together. I know I jumped a little bit here, but let's look at this. So the first 7, if we're looking, basically stops up here about the shoulder region. So if I'm looking, there's this first one right here, C1, C2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you can see that there is a big difference between how they look. Like, let me put them off to the side. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You can see that this one is much bigger than this one. If you get really close to it, kind of hard to see here, you can see where this one becomes a little bit more rounded than these. So that's the cervical region, right? And then you go from here and you can see that stops kind of right above the shoulders. And you'll see that right here, sorry guys, I'm trying to do this the best I can. Let me get over here. Do you see this right here? That's the first rib. That's where the thoracic region starts because essentially it's the thoracic kind of cavity that's here that we talked about. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So down here you'll notice that kind of where this guy, right below that, is where the last thoracic vertebrae is, right where the rib starts, rib cage ends right here. So that should make sense. Then you have from under here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the lumbar region. You can see at this point, there's no rib cage here. And then if we're going down here to the bottom, here's the 5. This is the sacrum right here, not this little guy that's on the bottom here, but from here. And then this little guy right here is the 4 fused. That's what's known as the tailbone that people break sometimes, and that's the coccyx. So that is the vertebral region. So the sacrum essentially looks like this. And you can see, and I think my heart is sacred to me, and this kind of looks like a heart that's come up. And so that is this last part that is right here, right? And then this guy, the little tailbone region, is just this little tail that comes off. There. Now let's actually talk about the vertebral column, and specifically let's talk about the individual vertebrae. Now you can see the sacrum and the coccyx on figure 8.12 as well. Now we're going to go to 8.10 and kind of talk a little bit about the different types of vertebrae. So we've already talked about this. This is the cervical region here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can see all of those right there. And then if you notice, C1 and C2 are colorized because they have specific names to them. This in here is the actual spinal column. You can see it goes down the middle where there's a hole there. And if you remember your skull, you'll remember we talked about this area right here, which was the occipital bone. And then at the bottom, they had these little kind of smooth areas here. Those smooth areas are in place flip this around here. So that this guy can sit on top of here. So if you noticed right there that this essentially fits really nice on this blue one. And you'll notice that where these regions are here, they sit right here where those regions are kind of flat here. So let me pull this out so you can see this. So this is that blue one, that first one we're looking at. And you can see they have these nice, smooth regions right there. And if you look back here, you'll notice that those are nice and smooth. So essentially what happens is they fit rather nicely onto those and they come together like that. So this guy, if you look on 8.1, figure B, you'll see a picture of him. He is what's known as the atlas. And you guys might have heard or seen an artwork in the past where it has a man pondering, sitting down like this, and he has the world on his back. And the name of that painting or that sculpture is Atlas. And you can think of this guy as the man, and that the skull is the world that he's holding up. And that's essentially the terminology that comes from this. Now, right underneath this, where this kind of fits, like this, you'll notice that this little kind of hole comes up here, or this little divot kind of thing comes up here. You can see it right here. Do you see how the blue is here and the green? And then you can see that part of that green is coming up here. Well, this is the C2 vertebrae. And it's what's known as the axis. And what does the world rotate around? The central axis, right? And so that's where this terminology comes from here. This is the small kind of axis or pivot point that the brain is going, or not the brain, the skull is going to rotate around. And so this guy right here is the C2 or axis. And that pivot point is what's known as an odontoid process, or in your book, it calls it the dens. And so you should know those regions. Now, if we look through here, we can talk about a few things, and I'm going to give you a couple different examples. So this is a cervical vertebrae, And in it, we'll notice a few things. This guy right here that comes up, you'll notice that when we're looking at this, there are kind of this spine that we talk about that comes off here, right? And then if your doctor or gym teacher when you were younger was trying to determine if you had something known as scoliosis or a curvature of the spine, they would feel for these along your back to see if they were in line. So that is the back portion or the posterior portion of your vertebral column, and that's what's known as a spinous process. Now, on the other side of this is this area that is very, very, very kind of more wide and flat. And if you look at this guy, you can see him all the way through the entire vertebral column. And this is towards the actual body, right? Not towards the back. And it is where all the weight bearing is. So this, believe it or not, is called the body. Now these guys are in the transverse plane. They're across, right? So you can see that there are these kind of protrusions out on either side of this. And so if you look at this, for instance here, you'll notice that these protrusions on either side along the transverse plane are known as transverse process. Remember, the process are these small kind of things that come off of the bone. Now, those can look different depending on where we are in terms of the spine. For instance, if you notice this one, they had the transverse process and there were no holes next to it. But if you look at this one, this is one of the ones in the cervical region. You'll notice you had the transverse process right here, but then a hole right next to it. Well, the hole, again, on the transverse plane are called the transverse foramen. Not to be confused with the big hole. The big hole is in the middle of the vertebral column, so this is what's known as the vertebral foramen. So the ones that are crossed the transverse plane, I like to think, are the transverse processes or transverse foramen. The big one that the spinal cord goes through is the transverse foramen. Now this area that, or if I'm looking at this bone, this area between where the hole is here and the body is, this small piece that's right here, that bone, is what's known as the pedicle. Now the connection bone between this area here and the spinous process here, that's what's called the lamina. So that's all for the individual parts of the vertebrae. Now just a reminder that the area, these are the articulation, right? The joints. And there is cartilage between the joints. And that cartilage is what's known as an intervertebral disc. So let's go to the last part of the axial skeleton, which essentially is the thorax, and essentially we're talking about the rib cage. So if we're looking at the rib cage, we can go back to 8.11. And essentially, I'm going to pull this off really quick. This is a bone we have, and then I'll come back to my full skeleton. So this is the rib cage. Let me flip this around right. And so this that you see here is all what's known as costal cartilage, right? And so this is what's going to connect the sternum area to the ribs over here. Now the sternum can be divided into three main parts. This main one that tends to have, if you can look, you can see where there is a line about right here. That's what the main bone is called, the sternum, but the individual parts that make up the sternum separate. The first one is this. So this guy right here is the manubrium. And then if you look to where it cuts here, this part right here is known as the gladiolus. They sometimes call it the body as well. And then if you see, you can see that there's this little part that's down at the bottom here, and that's what's known as the xiphoid process. So those are the three main parts of the bigger bone known as the sternum. Now from there, you can see we have what are known as true ribs, and that's 7. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you notice, for all of these, let me count them again. 1, it's connected to the sternum. 2, it's connected. 3, it's connected. 4, it's connected. 5 is connected. 6 is connected. And then the 7, if you look, is connected straight to it. Those are what we know as true ribs. Now, if you look here, guys, you'll notice that this one connects straight, but these guys, this 1, 2, 3 that's down here, they connect to the sternum, but they're kind of like feeder roads, right? That they go into the main road that's here. So those are not connecting straight to the sternum. So those are what are called false ribs. There's 3 of them there. And then we have 2 more that are at the last end that you don't see any costal cartilage for them because they're not connected to the sternum. And because they're not connected, they're called floating. So let me show you here with this guy. I'm going to pick you up again. So 1 connected, 2 connected, 3 connected, 4 connected, 5 connected, 6 connected, 7 connected. True ribs. Then you can see down here we have 1, 2, 3 that are connected to that 7th one, right? They go on to the freeway here. Those are the false ribs because they're not truly connected to the sternum. And then these last 2, you can see 1, 2, they're not connected at all. Those are floating. Again, if you're looking at here, you might be able to see this is the manubrium. You have the line here. The gladiolus is here. And the xiphoid process is down there. Again, all of this area that you can see here, costal cartilage. So with that being said, I am going to go ahead and stop this video. And then the next one that I make is going to continue on with the rest of my list on there. And it's going to focus on the appendicular skeleton. So, bye guys.